Hello and welcome back to Gapeys Garden. I can't believe it's the middle of July already and we finally have some warmer weather come our way, so everything is really starting to grow. I just wanted to give you a little tour of how the garden is looking right now. We haven't done an update since I think May. I will be doing separate videos on the figs and the peppers probably later this month, so I'm gonna skip over most of those and just show you what else is growing in the garden. So let's take a look and see how everything's doing. All right, we're gonna start with our in-ground bed. This is the only one we have that's not in a raised bed. And we've got, usually corn and potatoes is what we plant in here every year. And we've also got some flowers. So we've got some straw flowers. These are seeds that I got in a seed swap from Verdant Tears on Instagram. So I've got, I think, 4 or 5 different ones here. This one is just starting to bloom. They're all kind of light colored straw flowers. We've also got our dahlias. So these dahlias are ones that I grew from seed last year, and I didn't bother digging them up in the fall. I just left them in the ground and they both came back really beautifully. So we've got that one there, and we've got another one here. This one isn't quite blooming yet, but it is just about to. Here's another straw flower. Actually, this one is a darker red color. It's really pretty. And then we've got this kind of an orangish colored one, and also a pretty pink one. All these are from Verdant Tears. Now we've got several volunteer potatoes that we had come up in this bed, and I didn't pull them out, I just let them grow. So and they all had different colored flowers, so they're probably all different varieties that I grew last year. So we've got, I think, 6 volunteer potatoes growing in here. And then we've got some squash here that we're planting next to the corn. That is a butternut squash, and we've also got some delicatas in here too. So here we've got the corn, and the corn is finally starting to grow. We always measure the corn on the 4th of July, and if it's not knee-high by the 4th of July, then you may not get a good crop. And this was barely, most of it actually wasn't knee-high, but a couple of them were. So I'll say we're gonna have a good harvest, so we'll have to see. And then we've got some more squash over here. Now the ones over here have a lot more sun, so you can see they're growing much better. And I think, let's see, this one is a delicata. And if you see that green tape that you can see around this bed, that is actually some irrigation that I got from Watex. So it's kind of like a sprinkler. So when I turn it on, I've got a quick connect on the other end, so it's really easy to connect to the hose. But I usually water these about every couple days. So that has been working really well for this. I've got it kind of wrapped around this entire area, so it's the perfect size just for this spot. I've also got some flowers here. This one, I believe that's some kind of a Cosmo. I think it's a yellow Cosmo. And then we've got some zinnias. This is an Envy. It's a green variety, not quite blooming yet. And then these are the potatoes that I grew from seed this year from potato seeds that I saved last year. I've been having a big problem with, I think they're flea beetles. So you can see all the holes that are in the bottom leaves. I had that problem with the tomatoes too, but once they get tall enough, they seem to not have a problem. It only affects the bottom leaves. So this one actually doesn't look too bad, but the one behind it, if we take a look at this one has not really grown much, and you can see all the holes all over those leaves. We've got some new growth coming out, just starting, and that new growth looks pretty good so far. So hopefully we can get that to grow a little bit more. And we've got another variety of Cosmo here that looks like it's just starting to set out a bloom. So that should be opening soon. More squash back here. And then I planted some pole beans also, so I'm doing the Three Sisters garden, so that's corn, beans, and squash. And I've got, I think, 3 different varieties of pole beans in here. We've got a purple pole bean, and I think I've got Pellegrini, and maybe one other variety. So everything in here is looking pretty good except for some of the potatoes, but hopefully we get a good harvest. We have a few different things growing in this raised bed. We've got our chives here in the back, which flowered, and I made some yummy chive vinegar out of the blooms. And then here next to that, we've got a humongous tomatillo, actually 2 of them, but this one here on the south side is getting way taller than the one on the north side. And this variety is called Queen of Malinalco, I think it's called. But it's supposed to get really big fruits. I could feel they're starting to form, but I haven't harvested any yet. But they are supposed to be really big and really long. So this one is filling in pretty nicely. So we should be able to harvest some here probably before too long. But I've heard they've got a different kind of flavor than traditional tomatillos, so I'm not sure how I'm gonna like that one. So we'll have to wait and see how they are. So here we've got peppers I'll show in a later video. You can see I've got a bunch of debris down here, and that is what I just chopped off. That was growing in this bed. This is buckwheat, which is a cover crop. And that volunteered from the buckwheat that I grew last year, but it was getting pretty tall and starting to shade the peppers. So I decided to cut it back, and I'm using it as mulch around the peppers. Now I've got a couple of radicchios still in the ground here. Now this is culantro, which looks like it's going to seed, and I thought this was supposed to be fairly heat tolerant, but it seems to want to flower. We've got a volunteer squash here that's probably either a delicata or a butternut. I decided to just let that grow. And then here we've got our celeries. This is the tango celery, and then we've got our pink celery here. So I haven't harvested any yet, but it's almost, looks like I could probably harvest some of the outer stems. And then our carrots are doing really good. I planted these in early spring, and I got those thinned out, so they're a few inches apart now, and they are growing well. Hopefully we'll be able to harvest some of those in the fall, and I might leave some of those over winter. Here's some more radicchio. This is a speckled variety that looks like it's starting to bolt. This is a smaller one. I forget what varieties those are, but we've got quite a few of these that we planted in the spring, and I'm surprised they haven't bolted yet, so they must be fairly heat tolerant. We've got some parsley here, and then we've got a volunteer kale. I had kale in this bed last year that seeded, and that grew up out of it, and I decided to just let that grow. And then we've got some beans here. These are bush beans, and it looks like they've got, I haven't grown this variety before. This is called velour, and it's got some, looks like some really dark purple blooms that are just about to open up. So we should have some green beans here pretty soon. And that is all that's in this bed. I've got our pole beans here in this bed, and these are just starting to climb. They really started taking off over the last week or two. So all 3 varieties are climbing really well. We've got, let's see, this one is called Nona Agnes. This is a really, really pretty blue colored bean. And then this one here, let's see if I can pronounce it. It's called Karakagannak. Not sure if that's how you pronounce it, but that's what it looks like. So that is these are all dry beans. So I'll be waiting until these dry and harvesting them then. And then this one here is called Pale Gray Lavender, which is a really pretty purple bean. So I do have to keep an eye on these and make sure that they are climbing the right poles. So sometimes they like to move over and try to climb another pole, but I try to keep the same variety on the same pole. So you just have to kind of twist those around to where you want them to go and train them to grow on the right one. So I've got the same variety on the front and back poles, so if they end up crossing that way, that's fine. I just don't want them to cross from this pole to the ones over here. And then behind that, we have a little bit of space. I've been planning on putting the cabbages that I just started in this area, but right now we just have this mulched with, this is just leaves, dead leaves from last year. So that is keeping the ground nice and covered. And then we've got a little gem romaine, which looks like it's about ready to harvest. I don't think those get too much bigger than that, and I don't want it to bolt, so I'll probably be harvesting that soon. So here's some more of that volunteer buckwheat. So this is what it looks like. I think I pulled out all the ones that are flowering, so these ones I decided to just leave in, and I'll be pulling those probably when they get a little bit bigger. And then we've got our Queen Lime Blush Zinnia back here. And then these are 8 of our larger size tomatoes, and I've got kale planted in between I think I've got 4 kale plants, different varieties. This one is a Blue Vates curly kale. This is one of my favorites, but we've got a lot of kale this year, so I need to start harvesting more of that. I know a lot of people are curious what tomato varieties I'm growing this year, and I will be doing a separate video once I start getting some ripe tomatoes on which ones I'm growing. So I've got tomatoes set on, I think, almost all, if not all of the tomatoes that I'm growing this year, but I have not had any ripen up yet. I've got a mix of cherry tomatoes, larger tomatoes, and a lot of plum tomatoes this year. So stay tuned for that video. Now this one here is the Russian kale, and it looks like we have something that is eating that. Here we've got a Cosmo that looks like it's getting ready to bloom here pretty soon. And we've also got a volunteer straw flower. So I grew a bunch of straw flowers in this bed last year, and this one just happened to volunteer. I've also got some spring radicchio in this bed as well, and I've been cutting it back because it's kind of been crowding out the tomatoes here. So you can see this one here, I've cut out all of the leaves that were kind of encroaching on this tomato plant. Now this one was I think one of the first to start setting tomatoes, and these are a really beautiful striped tomato. So this is the speckled Roman. And then we've got our Bernary's giant orange zinnia. So this one had a rough start. It had some bad fungus because of all the rain, but it seems to have recovered quite well, and it's getting ready to bloom. Now this one here is the dazzling blue kale. So it's kind of similar to lacinato. The coloring is a little bit different. It's kind of more blue and has some nice purple stems on it. And then we've got a marigold. So this is from Fairy Morse Seeds marigold mix. Oh, here we have a buckwheat that's actually still blooming. So this one is a pink variety. I've got both pink ones and white ones in the garden, but I didn't chop this one down yet, but I probably will be pretty soon. And then the last kale we have over here is the scarlet kale. So this turns a lot darker purple in the colder months, but in the summertime it's kind of more of a greenish, dark green color, but the veins of it are nice and purple. Here we've got the onions, and these were a little bit slow to start, but they are doing much better now. I did have a problem with starlings pulling out the onion seedlings, so there's quite a few of them I had to replant that they had pulled out, and a few that they destroyed, and I ended up having to plant some extra ones that I had in the greenhouse. So we've got 3 different varieties this year. We've got Patterson. So I've got, I think, the most of those. That's a nice white or yellow onion. And then I've got a few different red onions. I've got the Blush, which I guess is more pink onion. And then I've got Rosa di Milano. So you can see some of them are really starting to bulb up a little bit, while others not as much. Now these were started at different times. The bigger ones here I started in, I think, January, late January. And then I got these other ones, these smaller ones, from a friend that started them a little bit later. So they're doing okay. We'll probably be able to harvest most of those in another month or 2. And then I've got some lettuce also planted in this bed, kind of between the garlic. So I do like to use that as a kind of a companion plant. And we've got some radishes back here. I've had kind of hit or miss with radishes, whether they bulb or not. So let's take a look and see how these guys are doing. So that one looks like it's bulbing up pretty nice, and it hasn't bolted yet, but it looks like it might be starting to. So I need to harvest some of these before they start flowering, because once they start flowering, then the radishes get really woody and not very good. So next to that, I've got the garlic. So I've got a lot of hardneck garlic this year. Next year, I'm probably going to grow more softneck, but you can tell this is where I cut the scapes off, and I've already done that a few weeks ago. So that cutting off those scapes from the hardneck garlic really helps the bulbs to get a lot bigger. So softneck garlic does not get those garlic scapes. And then we've got some lettuce in here. This is a red romaine type, and you can see it is bolting. So we've got so much lettuce in the garden this year that I just haven't been able to eat it all. So we've been feeding some of this bolted lettuce to the chickens. And then over here I've got I think 3 or 4 rows of the soft neck garlic. And soft neck usually is ready to harvest before the hard neck. So we are getting pretty close. You can tell when to harvest because the bottom few leaves start turning brown and dry. And you can see this one has 1 leaf dry, this one has 1 leaf. I usually wait till there's 2 or 3 leaves dried. So we probably will be ready to harvest these in another week or so. Then we've got some more radishes on the end of this bed. It looks like those are bulbing up pretty nicely. There's a nice big bulb there and it's not bolting yet. Here's one that is bolting and it doesn't have a bulb, so I'm going to go ahead and pull that out because it's not going to be good to eat. So I'll just compost that. And then we've got another parsley here on the end of this bed. I kind of put the parsley in random places in the garden. I did want to show you one garlic scape I just happened to miss. So this is what a garlic scape looks like. I did attempt to harvest this just a little while ago, and if your garlic scape, if you try to bend it and it doesn't snap off like this one, it just kind of bends and it won't break off, then that means you've waited too long to harvest it and it's going to be really woody and not very good to eat. So I need to come back and take that off with some pruners and just compost this because it's not going to be good to eat now. Now this here is a new bed that we put in. Actually, the bed was already here, but it just had grass and weeds growing in it. And this is along the chicken run. We decided to pull out the grass and just plant a bunch of random stuff in here. So it's mostly flowers. We've got some chamomile. This chamomile actually volunteered next to the bed, and I just dug it up and repotted it and replanted it in here. We've also got a few edibles. So this is a melon. This is a Minnesota midget melon. It's getting kind of crowded by these other things, but it is growing a little bit, and hopefully this is a short season melon, so hopefully we'll get something out of that. I've also got some beans planted in here, so these are just bush beans, and it looks like those are getting ready to flower there. Lots of chamomile in here. I also started some alyssum from seed this year, so this is a mix. I think that came from Fairy Morse as well, but it's got different shades of white and pink and purple. And that is doing really, really good, and it smells absolutely wonderful. This is the first time I've actually grown alyssum, and I don't think I'll be without it from now on. I've also got a few sunflowers in here, and oh, it looks like we have our first one that just started to open. So this is the Aster Cream sunflower. So it's a really light pale yellow, really pretty color. And then let's see, we've got, see if I could find it. We've got a zinnia there, and we had, I can't find it. Oh, there it is. We had this guy here. This is, or was, a sesame plant. So that was an experiment this year. Sesame takes a little bit more longer season. It did flower, which is kind of odd because I expected it to get a lot bigger than it is. So I don't really think that's going to do much. It's not looking so great, especially with all this stuff covering it up. And then we've got some more beans over here, more alyssums. This is a Cosmo. Now some of the alyssums actually didn't do very well. So this one here, you can see it's pretty much completely dried up. It seems like the darker colored flowered ones didn't do as well. The white ones obviously did the best. You can see how full that one is, but we had 2 or 3 that just ended up petering out and drying up. We've got a few more alyssums here. That's another Queen Lime Blush Zinnia. And then we've got some more radishes over here. I think this was an Easter egg mix because we've got some white ones, or maybe they're icicle radishes. I have no idea what kind of radishes I planted. I just planted different ones around the garden. But it looks like these ones are all white, so that's interesting. I don't remember planting white ones other than those that are in the Easter egg mix. So here's some more alyssums, and we've got some gomphrena. This is a flower. It's also called globe amaranth. It's the first time I've grown that. We've got a little flower there. And then we've got a volunteer tomato on the very end. I have no idea what variety it is. It just came up. We had some compost that we mixed in here, and so this came up from the compost, and Sandy is trying to eat my tomato. But we'll have to wait and see what this could be. Now most of what's in the greenhouse is peppers, so I'm going to skip over a lot of that. We do have an overwintered lacinato kale, and I'm surprised how long it's taken this to flower, but we finally do have some flower buds forming there, and I've been feeding a lot of that to the chickens. We have some more tomatoes in here. These are the Fortunia paste tomato and the Mama Leone tomato. So those are both Italian type tomatoes. They're kind of large plum sauce tomatoes. And then we've also got basil in here. So I've got some green basil. I've got the purple basil back there. And then this one down here is the lime basil, which all it seems to want to do is flower. So I'm constantly removing the flowers from that one, and it doesn't seem to want to grow that much. The leaves are really small also, but it has an interesting taste. It does taste a lot like limes. Now here we've got 3 different varieties of eggplants. We've got the, let's see, this one is the Chinese string, which I've grown a couple times before. It's really productive in a nice eggplant. This one here is a purple long one. Now it doesn't look like any of these have any eggplants growing yet, but there's lots of flowers on all 3 of these. And then this one here is called Hansel. So I think this is a hybrid variety that I got from my neighbor. And then we have one melon in here that I decided to try again. If you didn't catch my updates last year, I tried growing melons in the greenhouse and it was a fiasco. They grew really, really well at first, and then they got invaded by spider mites, which pretty much almost destroyed the whole greenhouse grow. But I was able to get them under control eventually. But I didn't get, I think I got 1 melon off of my plants last year. So I'm only growing one. This one is called Rich Sweetness. So I grew this one in the greenhouse because it takes a little bit longer growing season than the Minnesota Midget one. So we'll have to see how that does. And then I've got another kale over here. This is another one that overwintered, and we are also just starting to see that one come out with some flower buds, and I think this one is the Casper kale variety, which is a really good winter variety. And then I put up this trellis here in the back of the greenhouse because I always have cucamelons that come up in here, and I usually don't trellis them, and they end up growing pretty wild. So I decided to put this trellis in here this time, so hopefully that will help them grow a little bit better and make it easier to harvest. Now here in this cage, we've got our blueberries, and the berries are just starting to ripen, and the birds are loving blueberries. So we have been using this bird netting over the berries for the past several years, and I can't recommend it enough. This is the brand is called Dewitt, and we got it on Amazon, but it's called the Dewitt Bird Barricade, I believe, and it is super strong. It is made of a different material than normal bird netting is, so it's really easy to put on and take off. It doesn't get all tangled up like the other stuff, and birds do not ever get caught up or stuck in this netting. We've used some of that cheaper bird netting in the past and had birds get stuck, and it wasn't pretty. So this is the best stuff ever. It is a little bit more expensive, but it's definitely worth it, and it will last for many, many years. And I timed it. It only took us I think it was 2 minutes to put this on last month. So it is really a good netting. I'll put a link to it in the description if you're interested. We're not affiliates or anything, but I just really like this netting. Now here in this bed we have the rest of our tomatoes. So we've got 8 all cherry tomato varieties in this bed. And again, we have some kale interplanted between these, as well as some flowers. So we've got another marigold here. This one, I will show you this one because this is kind of an interesting variety. It's called spoon tomato, which is a currant variety. So the tomatoes get really, really tiny. So this is called a currant type tomato. So I'm always having to come in here and make sure the vines stay inside the cage. But I just noticed that we've got our first tomatoes starting to ripen. So you can see these are starting to change color, and you can see how teeny tiny these guys are. So that is the first time I've grown a currant variety of tomato, so I'm interested to see how these do. I've heard the spoon variety is actually really tasty, so I can't wait to try those probably in the next couple days. I'm not going to go over all the tomatoes, we'll have to save that for another video, but I just wanted to show you those since they're the first ones that have ripened or are going to ripen. So back here we've got another trellis. So here we've got our cucumbers. I've got 3 different varieties. We've got this Chinese yellow variety, and I have not grown that one before. We've also got a China Jade variety, and I think the other one is tender green. But all these are doing pretty well. They haven't produced any cucumbers yet, but hopefully they'll start soon. They are starting to climb up the trellis, so that's a good sign. Now we've also got some lettuce hiding back behind there, and I'm hoping the cucumbers provide a little bit of shade for those so they don't bolt too quickly. And then we've got a volunteer kale back there, which I think came from the microgreens that I grew in here in the spring. And we've got our chickens back here. They've been trying to get at the kale that's been in this bed. Now they can easily jump over this short fence, but for some reason they don't, which is a good thing. We've got our Cosmo back here, and then this kale the chickens have been nibbling on. You can see this whole half of it is kind of missing. So they poke their little heads through these holes and are able to reach that end of the kale. So that's another one of those blue vates varieties. And then we've got our zinnia, Cosmo, and then the last thing in here is our Goldini zucchini. And we are just starting to get some zucchinis forming on here. I did harvest one that was kind of a little small, but I couldn't wait anymore. But we should be inundated with zucchini here before too long. One more thing I wanted to show you back here by the tomatoes is this monstrosity that's growing next to the compost bins. So this has been coming back every year for the past few years. This is Jerusalem artichoke, and it's well over my head already, but it produces a lot of tubers in the fall, and the best time to harvest is early spring before it gets too warm. The only problem with this is it really spreads quite a bit, and unfortunately it made its way into this raised bed. So I've been pulling a ton of stuff that's been, you can see these here, these are all Jerusalem artichokes. So I may have to dig this whole bed up and try and find the tubers that keep sprouting. But I've been constantly pulling these out, and it doesn't pull out the tubers, so the tuber's probably still buried in there somewhere, but I don't want to dig too much in here because it would disturb the cucumbers and other stuff that I have growing in this bed. And here's another really big one. So these are just constantly growing all over in this bed, which is unfortunate. Another thing I wanted to mention is I did mulch with straw, so you can see there's straw down in a lot of the beds. We didn't get enough to cover all the beds, unfortunately, but one bale of straw, after the chickens went through it and ate all the seeds, we put them on. I think we filled up at least 3 or 4 of our beds, and that also went in the in-ground bed as well. So that is how the garden is looking in middle of July. It's a little bit behind previous years, but we're coming along. Thanks for watching, and we'll talk to you again soon. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. You can also find me on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook.